Welcome to Compassionate Conversations, where we push the boundaries of comfort to empower you to become all that you dream of being. Hi, I'm Esther Kane. I'm a Canadian psychotherapist and the author of It's Not About the Food, A Woman's Guide to Making Peace with Food and Our Bodies. For over 25 years, I've been helping people to overcome problematic relationships to food and their body image. And to my great delight, my book has helped thousands of people to do just that. I decided to do this series where I interview other body image warriors who I respect and love their work in order to help us form more of a community around talking about our disordered relationship with food and our bodies, in the hopes that we will find strength in each other's stories and share some really helpful tools and methods that you can use in order to heal your relationship with food and how you see your body. If you're thinking, I don't know if I have an eating disorder, so maybe these videos won't be meaningful to me, please give it a chance. When I tell people, for example, that I'm an eating disorder therapist, people automatically think eating disorders are just anorexia and bulimia. And while I treat those issues in my practice, the bulk of my clients tend to fall into the category of emotional eating. People who eat when they're mad, sad, glad, and fearful. There's all kinds of reasons that we turn to food. And they are usually the people that are yo-yo dieters, that do obsessive exercising. Maybe they are in middle age and their body's metabolism has changed and they've put on some extra weight and they just can't seem to get it off. All of these people fall into the category of some type of disordered eating pattern. So if that applies to you, please stay tuned. I'm going to be interviewing some fabulous people in this series who will definitely give you some great ideas and tips in order to make peace with food and your body. Welcome to Compassionate Conversations, the Body Image series. I'm so excited about today's episode where I will be interviewing the two co-hosts of the podcast, Food Junkies, Clarissa Kennedy and Molly Painschab. Molly is a dual licensed mental health and addiction counselor and has worked in the field since 2005. She is co-chair of the Sugar and Food Addiction Professional Network. Molly is also a member of the Academy of Eating Disorders and the Substance Use Disorders Special Interest Group. Clarissa Kennedy is a clinical social worker and the founder of Reinvent Your Bliss Point. She is a registered member of the Ontario Association of Mental Health Professionals. She prides herself on teaching individuals actionable solutions to problems that occur when they are struggling with food addiction and eating disorders. Clarissa and Molly met in 2019 at a training program for food addiction professionals. Then they partnered with Dr. Vera Tarman to launch the Food Junkies podcast, as well as running clinical research groups on treatment interventions for ultra-processed food addiction. Together, they have created a self-directed program called Sweet Sobriety, which supports people in recovery from food addiction. Welcome, Clarissa and Molly. So glad to have you.
Thanks, Esther, for having us.
So happy to have you. So, firstly, this is my first time doing a 3-person video, so podcast. It's fun. So can each of you share your own personal story with food addiction, which led you to the work that you do? Molly, then Clarissa.
Sure. So my story with food probably started, I think it started probably back when I was 9, 10 years old. My parents got divorced. I was the oldest of 4 children. And I think just dealing with that as a 9, 10-year-old, food was my outlet. I think I found it and I used it for emotional comfort, that kind of thing. As the years went on, um, I I don't know that I used food excessively, but certainly I used it emotionally. So I don't ever remember there being, like huge binges or anything like that. But it was really like anytime I was overly anxious or stressed, or
Mhm.
sad, that kind of thing, food was my comfort. And when I was eating meals, I wasn't choosing whole real foods either, right? I was a
Yeah.
teenager and a young adult. I was picking things like pizza and
Yeah.
like those big pretzels you can get at the mall and calling that my
Yeah.
meal, right? Washed down
Right.
with a big
Right.
old soda. And so, fast forward, I got into mental health and addiction. I got into the mental health and addiction field. I was doing my own therapy work from the time I was about 22 years old. Still
Yeah.
to this day, I have my own therapist. I had a couple bouts of pretty bad depression in which I was actively suicidal.
Yeah.
All of that. Got married to my high school sweetheart. We're cruising along in life, and I've finished my master's degree, and we're like, okay, we're going to start our family now. So I was late 20s, and I had gained probably a good 70 pounds
Mm.
since high school at that point. So, over 10 years, I'd gained about 70 pounds, and I wasn't able to conceive a child. And so I went to the doctor and I was diagnosed with polycystic ovarian syndrome.
Yeah.
I was put on some medications. I was able to have my first child, and I gained another like 30 pounds post first baby.
Mhm.
Um, Ended up
And
having,
where was the food at around all that?
yeah, I think it was all still the same. I was using it very emotionally. I wasn't making like the decisions I was making. Like I was still eating the same way I grew up, with a very like single mother of four. Like everything was right? Like casseroles
Yeah.
and convenience,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So if I could hit the drive-through, that's what I was getting for my meal. If I was particularly short on money that week, it was ramen noodles or a
Yeah.
box of macaroni and cheese, which is I think like 7 portions or something, but I was eating the whole
Yeah.
thing to myself and calling it a
Right.
meal, right? That
Yeah.
kind of thing. And again, just really finding myself, like emotionally, like I'd start with a big bag of chips and I wouldn't stop until it was gone, kind of deal, right? Because I'm like
Yeah.
in my emotions. Um, and I all the time, again, like still like going to counseling and like, what is this thing with the food? And, not ever going to like an eating disorder person, but certainly never having a therapist that really understood what was happening, whether from
Mhm.
an addiction perspective or even like from an emotional eating perspective, right? It was always like, oh, just slow it down, everything in moderation.
Yeah.
You're so normal, right? Like you're doing everything
Right.
that anybody else would do.
Yeah.
Um,
So normalized, isn't it?
yeah, so normalized. And in 2017, like late fall 2017, my husband was listening to the Joe Rogan Experience, and I am not a
Mhm.
Joe Rogan fan, never have been, and he
Yeah.
knew that. Joe Rogan had Dr. Sean Baker on, and they were talking about, because it's like a marathon, right? Like he has 3-hour episodes, and at some point
Yeah.
in this episode or interview, they're talking about being in a ketogenic way and it treating or being a possible treatment for polycystic ovarian syndrome. And my husband was like,
Oh.
ding. And
Oh.
so he encouraged me to listen to that podcast. He's like, just
Yeah.
give it a listen because I know you struggle. Like I hear you
Yeah.
talk about like your frustrations and all of that. And I had 2 little children and like I couldn't get down onto the floor to play with them. And if I could, I couldn't get back up. Like I love to hike and be outside. And I was having a hard time
Mhm.
like walking up the stairs in my own house to the upper level where my bedroom was. And so I took a listen and I then spent another month researching. And I said, November 3rd, 2017, I'm going to try this for 21 days because I can do anything for 21 days. And in 2017, the 22nd day was American Thanksgiving. So I was like, if I
Mhm.
hate it and I do it for 21 days and I hate it, the 22nd day is American Thanksgiving and I can do whatever I want, right? At that point.
That's such weird timing, isn't it?
Right. Yeah. So, but I got to the end of that 3 weeks and I told my husband, I said, I don't care if I lose a pound. I don't care, whatever. Like, I feel so good.
Yeah.
My mental health, which I thought was pretty stable, was actually significantly improved. Depression and anxiety that I didn't realize was still hanging on
Yeah.
was lifted. Right. So it was like, oh my gosh,
Yeah.
like I felt
I've
so
got, I
good.
just interject, Molly. I have
Yeah.
a very, very parallel experience. I'm keto and have been for over 10 years, and so many of the same benefits. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. And so from there, I really dove in and I was following a gal on social media and she happened to read Vera's book, Food Junkies. And
Okay.
she had said, like, hey guys, if you're following me, and she like holds up the book, she's like, I'm reading this book, it's life-changing, give it
Ah,
a shot. Well, the addiction counselor in me was like, huh, this is interesting.
it's such
So
a
I
the
read it.
cover is so gripping, isn't it?
It is. And to put junkie with food, right?
I know,
It was
it's
like,
so good.
what? And because I've spent my entire career working with people with methamphetamine addiction or alcohol use disorder or,
Yeah.
whatever,
It was
gambling,
a
whatever.
natural fit, I guess. Hey.
Yeah. Yeah. So I read the book and I was like, oh my gosh, like mind exploded.
Ming,
These
ming,
puzzle
ming.
pieces come together. And it just kind of grew from there. I found Vinnie Tortorich, who did like no sugar, no grains, so like my journey has just kind of, I never started my journey going, I have an addiction and I'm getting sober and like this is my path.
Yeah.
It was
Yeah.
more of a how do I treat these medical conditions that I have?
Yes.
And then realizing that there was this chemical dependency to these things that were designed to become, for us to become
Yeah.
chemically dependent to. And then
What were your
life.
addictive foods?
I would say typically for me expressly, it's like bread type things.
Okay.
So, breads, pastas, pizza
Yeah.
crust, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
I've never been like a huge fan of like ice cream I could take or leave, or like
Okay.
the candies I could take or leave, like hard candies. But like at East, so it would be like chocolate and peanut butter combination.
Yeah.
And then breads, I would say specifically are mine. If I,
Yeah.
eat one Reese's peanut butter cup, I'm having mall, and my children used to like be like really upset with me when it was Easter or Halloween time.
Yeah.
I was taking those
Mommy stole
from
my
I
candy.
was taking those from their buckets. And now we
Yeah.
don't even do Halloween like that anymore. We do switch at this point. So it's amazing. So
Yeah.
my journey has just been like this progression over time, that I didn't really come from a background of personal addiction to anything else. Having a
Yep.
father with alcohol use disorder, I think that really kind of scared
Yeah.
me as a younger adult,
Yeah.
that I was like, oh,
Yeah.
I could see myself like falling into that.
Yeah.
Like it seemed really, there was like a it was really what's the word, like intoxicating. It was intoxicating,
Yeah.
that pull with the alcohol when
Yeah.
I was about 21, 22. And I
Yeah.
distinctly remember going, oh, I could see myself following in those footsteps.
Yeah.
And I put it down,
Yeah.
and I've really not consumed alcohol since then. It's very sporadic, like very rare, very sporadic, if at all.
Yeah.
So I can see the tendencies there. And I think the same with the food, like that there's that suck,
Yeah.
right? Like if I eat one piece of bread, I'm eating the whole loaf. If I eat
Yeah.
one piece of
Yeah.
pizza, I'm eating the whole,
Yeah.
the whole box. So that's kind of led me to today. I mean, I then of course the professional in me started researching, and I started doing more education. I got hooked up with the InFact program, which then is like you said in the intro, is like how I met Clarissa. And yeah,
Mhm.
the rest is kind of history. So that's my primary
Mhm.
purpose now, is that I work with clients who are
Yeah.
trying to get into or are in recovery and want to level up their recovery with, food addiction or whatever label that they
Yeah.
want to put on it. But primarily, I
Yeah.
really like working at that intersection of eating disorders and food addiction. I think that
Yeah.
there's a real need there. So,
Yeah.
yeah. So if I left anything out, feel free to ask. But I know Clarissa has a story to share as
Yeah.
well as to how she got
Yeah.
here.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of parallels for you and me, Molly. Yeah. Yeah. And I love working at the intersection of food addiction, eating disorders. And it's funny, one of my clients was saying to me yesterday, I'm so glad I found you. Not many people do this. And I don't know why that is, because I love this work. But I find out, like so many other therapists, they send me this stuff. They don't want to touch it. So
Yeah.
it's niche. Okay. Thank you. Clarissa, let's hear your story about food addiction.
Yeah, so my story, definitely if you sit in any of the rooms of any of like anonymous programs. It's very similar. I always kind of felt like I didn't fit in, but I was very, athletic, and I came from a very privileged home. But I also grew up, love you, mom, on completely processed foods like
Mhm.
chocolate breakfast for my morning drink. I just drawn to that. We had the Kennedy candy cupboard. It was well known throughout the neighborhood. And,
What?
I
Oh, Kennedy Candy. That was because your last
candy
name.
cupboard.
Kennedy.
Yeah, it was a big
Wow, it was a
pantry
name.
with the Joe
Okay.
Louis, the anything you can
Okay.
imagine. It was in there, and everyone came to my house to get it.
You were popular.
Yeah, and that was just my normal. And
Okay.
so, being so athletic, I did softball, gymnastics, all of these things. It never really seemed like a big issue for me, I would say, really, until I got to university, where I kind of dropped some of the athletics. And it was a simple comment. One of my new roommates said that, it would be nice to fit in the same size pants. And all I
Oh,
heard was, "You are fat and you need to lose weight,"
yeah.
because she was thinner than me,
Isn't that
and it
amazing? I just want to
spiraled.
stop there for a second. Isn't that amazing what we do with that simple, innocent comment from someone
Right.
else?
And again, we talk
Story
about
we
that
make up.
highly sensitive person, right?
Yes, you're
Is
a highly
like,
sensitive
this
person.
is the comment that then I ruminated on. And I just, at that point, I didn't know how to eat. I didn't know really what to eat to lose weight. So I just stopped eating because I felt like I had a
Oh,
loss of control over all foods,
oh.
which kind of was
How old were
true.
you?
19. Yeah.
Oh,
So just entering university. And so that is really where anorexia developed. And, when I left first year university, I got down to 80 pounds, and it was pretty serious. And
yeah.
so I went to, some eating disorder treatment, and they were really just trying to get me to eat all these foods that I was
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
knew I couldn't handle. And, but I was willing to try. And then I just, put on some weight. But I found bulimia, which then took
Yeah.
care of
Yeah.
all of that. And so, I was able to function with bulimia for quite a while. And because now I'd gone through that restriction binge, right? So
Yeah.
it was all about the binge. And, I would do really gross habits like chewing food and spitting it out, and all
Mm.
of those kind of associations, until the point where I couldn't really, I was at the time I started working in the restaurant field. And so it became
Mhm.
really
Ah,
challenging to
yes.
do the binge purge there, because I was managing a restaurant. And so then I kind of transferred to laxatives, all the while just not being able, always trying to control my weight, always trying,
Yeah.
obsessing about food, working around food all day long.
That's hard. Yeah.
Yeah, and then also I started drinking, and drinking really, I
Oh,
mean, drinking had always been there in the background, but I think I really started drinking more even to control, like when I drank, I didn't need to eat. And so again, and it
yeah.
also quieted the noise in my head at that time.
Okay.
And so, there was a bit of all of that going on. And then I was in a major car accident when I was 25. So,
Oh,
basically restricting on laxatives and drinking, which was
oh.
not a great combination.
Well,
And
tell us more about the car accident. Where did that leave you physically?
yeah, it was serious. So I had a Glasgow coma scale of 8. So it's a catastrophic injury with a major
Oh,
brain injury. And I don't know if your audience will see this, but I have like a laceration on my neck from
oh,
one side to the other side, which is less
wow.
than a millimeter on each side of the carotid artery. So I was just very fortunate. An off-duty volunteer firefighter came upon the scene. I was at the hospital, like a major trauma hospital at Hamilton General.
Yeah.
Within 15 minutes, there had
Oh,
been a major trauma happened right before mine. So all of the team was there. And I mean, I was still in hospital, multiple surgeries.
oh, okay.
I basically swerved off the road, and the car flipped upside down, and a fence post went through the windshield and through my right arm. So very
Oh,
lucky to be alive.
oh, so
And
sorry.
yeah, so it was really then recovery from that was a lot of physical, like physio, because my arm was shattered. And so there was also a lot of pain. So then I got prescribed Percocet.
Oh, no.
And yeah,
I think I see where this is going.
yeah. So, and at the time, dad's a doctor, mom's a nurse, sister's a nurse. Nobody's really, this is opioid crisis, right? Nobody's
Yeah,
saying,
yeah,
hey, you should be concerned about this. It's like, of course you need this pain meds. Like, I
yeah.
was doing physio and my guy was like on my arm, kind of trying to crank it because I just had no rotation whatsoever. So,
Wow.
that pain medication just became important. And for a time it was doing exactly what it was supposed to do. I
Yeah.
also enjoyed it because it eliminated hunger again.
Oh,
Right.
okay.
And so
Yeah.
this was a good thing for me. And I went back to work since 6 months later.
6 months.
Probably, yes, probably too soon. But I was at
Wait.
the time, I was the general manager of the restaurant. Things were starting to not go as well. And, it's just who I always was, right? That
Mm,
drive, passion,
yeah,
and
yeah.
get back to work. And I felt like I could do it. And then unfortunately, they had left some dirt in the wound. So I had to go back for an additional surgery and have my arm all redone again, which meant I was on the pain meds for another extended year.
Oh my.
And that was then when I tried to start reducing them, that's when I ran into trouble. And so, I didn't really let anyone know what was going on. And I was reducing the meds, but I started drinking more. And then
Oh,
we had a Boston Pizza because I owned, at that point, I'd gotten married. I was part owner of a Boston Pizza franchise. We had a
okay.
conference in California. And so I was like, well, I'll just go cold turkey off of both these things. Um,
Oh,
not well educated or well versed in addiction at all at this point.
yeah.
And sure enough, I was hallucinating. I ended up at my dad's hospital in the
Oh,
psych ward, just going through the detox of
yeah.
these, going off alcohol cold turkey and prescription pills. And so,
Oh my.
fortunate to say that that was enough for me never to experiment with prescription pills ever again.
Okay.
But my
Well, you weren't
relationship,
experimenting though. I mean, you
yeah,
knew.
no, no.
Yeah,
Yeah, but going forward, I mean, even if I have dental work or anything, it's not something
yeah,
I
yeah,
would go play with at all.
yeah, yeah.
So, we kind of at the time, it's very interesting having a father being a physician, a mother, they didn't really, there was a lot of shame they had around addiction. And so,
Oh,
of
right.
course, I went and saw a psychiatrist and I got diagnosed with bipolar. And that's
Oh,
great, right? We're like, this is great. This explains everything because it's not addiction. It's got to be a mental illness.
oh.
So, like, I think my first treatment center I went to, I checked in with like bipolar, eating disorder, like all of the
What else
diagnoses,
can we label you?
addiction. Yeah, it was like fantastic. And of course, there they were like, okay, this is addiction. This isn't bipolar.
Yeah, I was just thinking it probably wasn't my. Okay.
Exactly. I think we were just looking for anything but, right? And I was hopeful too because I wanted to be able to like drink like a normal person and
So,
now no point did
so
anyone say this eating disorder like that's
yeah.
still just going on and I
Oh
just
my
feel like
God.
I'd been told in eating disorder treatment this is something we just live with. Like there's not
Yeah,
a lot
yeah,
of recovery from this.
yeah,
And
yeah. I was told that too.
go
You'll
on.
never recover.
Yeah, exactly. It's just going to be part of you. It's just this
That's what
part
they
of you
always said
that
to
you
me. Yep.
and so, I would go for like 8 months. And after I will say after that first treatment center, I was really inspired. I found recovery, no more alcohol, and I actually went to school for addictions and mental health. And but
Oh,
I would still have like, I'd be a year, and then I would have a relapse for like a binge weekend, and then it was like a year, and then I would have another relapse or every 8 months or something like that. And so again, I went to another treatment, always going to treatment sober, trying to figure out like what's going on with me, what am I doing wrong, what's
are
missing.
we? Are we? Are you talking about Clarissa the food at this point? Is what
No,
you're
I
looking for, or
no
food?
alcohol,
Oh,
alcohol
I see. I see.
specifically. And alcohol was my problem, for sure. But I was also
Yeah.
restricting, over exercising.
Yeah. Yeah.
I at the age of 19, I stopped eating fat. And I
Ah.
didn't eat fat actually until 36.
Oh
My
my.
only condiment was mustard. Nobody ever alerted me and said this is probably not a safe or healthy thing to do.
Very
And
bad.
I
Yeah.
grew up in that fat phobic era, right? When I
Yeah.
got in the car accident, I was vegetarian.
Yeah.
So, they really encouraged me to start adding in some protein
Yeah.
after the accident to help recover. So I reintroduced meat, but I was still always like counting calories, like
Yeah.
eating a lot of lettuce and light Italian dressing. And
Yeah. Yeah.
however, those around me would have thought that I was very healthy.
Right.
But they didn't really know what was extremely going on. And so, this never really feeling a reprieve from alcohol use disorder was
Yeah.
really frustrating for me, and it would get in the way.
Yeah.
I had gotten a DUI. I was really at this point where I
Wow.
needed to get things figured out. So I
Yes.
had gone for another treatment center, which was private, supposed to be the best, and like that hadn't really fixed it. So I decided I would go to a free treatment center. Maybe that was the way. And it just
Yes.
so happened while I was there, I was at Renaissance and I
Ah.
told my story. And
Wow.
Dr. Tarman was like typing away on her computer, and she turned around and she said, "Have you ever heard of food addiction?"
Oh,
And that
amazing.
was where my journey began.
That is incredible, Clarissa. Wow. Wow.
So
Yeah.
she signed her book, gave it to me,
Ah,
and then it was really just information seeking. I still at this point I hadn't really figured out what to eat, how to eat.
yeah.
But I took the InFact course, and part of that was going to Iceland to do a 5-day intensive training, where I was really seen at that time as the professional, and there were some individuals who were seeking recovery in there.
Okay.
However, like first day we sit down and I ate, like they put on this plate like 1,000 times more food than I'd
Yeah.
ever eaten in
Yeah.
however many years. And so like there was some tears. I sat up
Ah,
all night thinking about how, because it triggered bulimia 100%
okay.
again, right? And so,
Right.
but it was just fortunate. I was trapped. There was a huge snowstorm in Iceland. I couldn't leave.
I would
I
think
didn't,
in Iceland there
yeah,
might be better.
I didn't know the facility well enough to be able to find a bathroom for like, that
You
snake
couldn't.
purging behavior that,
You were
so
trapped.
I just tolerated it. And I would say on
Yeah.
day 3, it was like, wow. So I felt like something had changed and something had
Yeah.
shifted. And it was
Yeah.
just eating real food. It was eating
Yeah. You were
fat.
nourished.
I was nourished. And it
Your
was the
brain was
first
probably working.
time. Exactly. And
Yeah.
so that was the first day really where I consider myself getting sober, and it's been ever since. Yeah.
So when was that again?
That was the 2018, the February
2018.
of
Yeah.
2018. And
Oh,
so, yeah,
congratulations.
from there I took
5 years.
Bitten's
Uh-huh.
holistic addiction medicine. I had already done social work. And so
Yeah.
I just started to do private practice, and, it was going okay. But you kind of felt like a lone wolf. And then they did
Yeah.
have that next intensives, kind of the same thing. I'd gone to Iceland. They had it in Canada and I volunteered to go help. That's where I met Molly. And then it was like, I found my person that I could do this
Ah,
with. And then
right.
it's just
Right.
been, yeah, history ever since.
Beautiful. Wow. What a story. Both of your stories are so wonderful. And
Yeah.
so diverse, like we're all so different and yet we share a lot of commonalities. Yeah. And, but we're all here doing this work now. Um, okay. So both of you, I know you're used to talking together, just chime in. I'm going to ask you questions that are for both of you. So why do you focus? I'm sure my audience wants to know, why do you focus so heavily on addiction to sugar in particular? Maybe you should talk more about what your collaborative project is now, and that will help people to understand what it's all about and the sugar focus.
Yeah, for sure. And I think I want to clarify first that, it's not just specifically sugar. We're really looking at like ultra processed food addiction. And
Okay.
so that is really, we're talking about the hyperpalatable,
Mm.
there's this NOVA classification scale, which talks about the level of processing a food has. And so when we talk about that, it's really like the cookies, the chips,
Mm.
the
Mm.
ice cream, like so that hyperpalatable food that really sparks dopamine. And
Yeah.
so, not just necessarily sugar, but these whole spectrum of foods that can be
Yeah.
problematic for people. Like basically, nothing that is a whole food
Yeah. Yeah.
are the foods that people struggle with. And so, both
Yeah.
Molly and I participated in a study, which was ultra processed food addiction. It was a 10-week study, and it was doing psychoeducation
Mhm.
on addiction. And so
Yeah.
through those, we did modules on what is food addiction, what is mindful eating. We talked about
Mm.
abstinence withdrawal. We talked about craving management, cross
Mhm.
addiction, hope and resilience, some
Yeah.
cognitive distortions,
Okay.
unhelpful thinking styles, stress management, emotional eating,
Yeah.
self compassion, and finally with body. So we took participants through these 10 weeks, and we put it out on the Facebook groups to have people who had never had treatment before for food
Yeah.
addiction or work with a professional, and identified with a lot of the symptoms of food addiction, which,
Yes.
are like craving for more, they have a tolerance, withdrawal, they've maybe tried to quit using and they've gone back,
Yeah.
obsession. And so, they really met the criteria for someone who could identify with ultra processed food addiction, whether it was mild, moderate, and severe. So we took them through these 10 weeks, and we using the MY fast, which is really, or I think craved as well as what we use, which really replicates the DSM in terms
Mm.
of like the criteria for substance use disorder.
Yeah. Yeah.
We measured their food addiction symptoms. We measured their BMI, which we didn't really care about, but we know the world cares
Yeah.
about.
Unfortunately.
Yeah, and we used well-being, a measure of well-being. And so we took their levels at the beginning of the intervention, and then so pre and post 10 weeks. And after the 10 weeks, their food addiction symptoms went down, their BMI went down, and their level of well-being went up. And so we were really excited about those
Yeah.
scores. And so Dr. Jen Unwin put together a paper and published it. And it really, it made a lot of noise in our community
Yeah.
because there hadn't really been any treatment done,
Yeah.
or any documented best practice treatment for ultra
Yeah.
processed food addiction. And
Yes.
Molly and I at the
It's such a
time,
huge issue right now.
yeah,
Oh,
we were
never
already
before have we had so many ultra processed foods being thrown at
exactly.
faces. Yes.
Yeah, so we were really looking to now, okay, we know that this is a best practice. How can we give this to the rest of the world?
Mm.
And so we created Sweet Sobriety, and I'll let Molly tell you a little bit about what
Yeah.
what our program is.
Yeah,
Sure.
so we have the education side of things. So we took those same modules that we did in the study, and we expanded upon them, and we call those our foundation modules. We really love for people to start there, especially if they've never had treatment before, but even if they have had some form of treatment, just because there's so much information packed in there. So there's lots of videos, there's lots of worksheets that you can download and fill out, and you have access to that, for as long as the website exists. You have access to that. So you can go back and watch the videos again, all of that.
Mhm.
We also provide monthly workshops. So back in November, we did a a surviving the holidays workshop
Yeah,
that
important.
our colleague hosted.
Yeah.
And then so Bethany Mazaru hosted that this month. In fact, on the 7th, we're kicking off a workshop hosted by Jennifer Bradley on cravings. So
Ah,
really getting into physical and psychological cravings, and
cool.
providing lots of different tools in
Yes.
how to manage those different, because they show up differently and you need different things.
Yeah.
So we have the education side, and then kind of the thing that I think Clarissa and I really wanted to provide, and I think we're getting there, and it's seeming to be pretty successful. December 1st, we launched a subscription program where it's unlimited monthly coaching for $25 US. And we
Wow.
offer 5 groups a week. So you could come to
That's
all 5
amazing.
groups every week, all month
Yeah.
long. And it I think it ends up being like $125 US per
That's
group if you did
amazing.
that.
Yeah.
Or you
What
could
a
come to
deal.
like 4, and then it's like $4 or $5 US. So
Yeah.
it's still very, we want it to be very accessible. And we know that
Yes.
finances can be a barrier to treatment. Now,
Exactly.
group treatment isn't necessarily for everyone, but
Yeah.
certainly the people who do come, and if that's the only thing that they can afford, right? Like they're doing the work and they're finding their way through. And then we all offer individual services as well. But ultimately, that's our hope, is that we can grow and expand Sweet Sobriety, the platform. It provides a community, right? It has its
Mhm.
own little area for people to ask questions and get support that's free of social media constraints. So,
Yes.
we don't have the Mark Zuckerbergs of the world and his
Yeah.
minions shutting down, because we get censored for using terms like eating disorder, bulimia,
Well, and
anorexia,
Elon Musk has
addiction.
ruined Twitter. I mean,
Twitter, right? Yeah. So it's a really neat opportunity for us to be able to provide something on a platform separate from that. We own it, so right. So
okay.
we get the opportunity to monitor and decide what's going there. On top of all of that, we also have a YouTube channel where we interview people giving their stories. Day
Cool.
1, hour
Yeah.
12, day 1001. It doesn't really matter. We want stories from people.
Powerful. Yeah.
Exactly, because it's powerful, and because we believe that recovering out loud means that others don't suffer in silence. So
I love that.
ultimately, I would say that's what Sweet Sobriety is about. We want to grow, we want to grow other professionals as well and take them under our wings and say,
Yeah.
Here's how you can be a better clinician in this area, according to us, of course, which not necessarily is the end all be all, but certainly
Well,
based
you have a
on
lot
our
of
years of
combined
experience.
experience.
And yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
Training.
Yeah, absolutely. And to come from having both of us having worked prior in substance use disorders and mental health, right? And then
Yes.
being able to bring all of that and tailor it to the food, because the
Yeah.
food is similar and it's very different,
Yeah.
right? So there are things that, I
How's
might
it
say to
different?
somebody with with meth use disorder, right? I'm probably not going to say like, oh, let's only get high 3 times this week, right?
Right.
But with food, I might say, depending on the person, right? So some clients are straight up, I'm ready to be cold turkey.
Yeah.
Other clients are like, oh, I don't know if I can't see myself giving up X, Y, or Z just yet. Okay, well,
Yeah.
what if we just got consistent with just 1 meal a day that was low exposure, right? It didn't include any of those,
Yeah.
alcoholic type foods or drug like foods, the red foods. It doesn't the
Okay.
high exposure ultra processed foods. Could we just start with 1 meal a day and
I
get
see.
stabilized with that? And then what if we added another one, that kind of thing.
Okay. So you
instead of-
tailor make it to people's
Yeah,
where they're at.
right.
That's nice.
Right. It goes a little bit more along the lines, like I think about it more along the lines of when I'm working with somebody to get off of nicotine or caffeine.
Okay.
Right. So the approach is more that way, again, like we cause a lot of waves, I think, in the food addiction camp, because there are, right. And I found this to be true when I worked in like what I call like traditional mental health and addiction treatment, is that we have like what I call like old school thinkers, where addiction is addiction is addiction is addiction.
Yeah.
A drug is a drug is a drug is a drug. Right. And it's very hard line, and everybody has to go to 12-step. And if you're not going to 12-step and you're not working the steps, and
you
right,
have to hit rock bottom.
yes, and you have to hit rock bottom, all of these
Yeah.
things. If you don't meet these very specific criteria, it's never going to work for you.
Yeah.
Good luck to you. Let me know
Yeah.
when you're ready to actually get help.
Yeah.
Where we're really about meeting clients where they're at. We're harm reduction
Right.
clinicians, that
Harm
would be-
reduction. Yeah.
Yeah. And ultimate harm reduction, right, would be 0. Absolutely.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
I
But it's
also
not
know
feasible.
I've worked with clients who were opioid users for so many years that at this point, they're going to be on methadone or Suboxone or naltrexone or something along those lines for the rest of their life, so that their brain can work to the best of its ability. Right.
Yeah,
So
right.
I have to believe that there's probably some of that happens with the food as well.
Oh,
So
yeah.
so I don't know, Clarissa, if I left anything out, jump in there, but ultimately that's kind of like right now where we're at with sweet sobriety. And I'm sure it will continue to
Beautiful.
grow, and we'll train more clinicians. And
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I think the food is harder too because if it is alcohol or it is drugs, you do have the ability to limit the friends you hang out with, limit the
Mhm.
places you go, and we are bombarded with cues and triggers with food all
Yeah.
day long. And so our recovery game has to be super strong, and we have to
Yeah.
be ready and have craving management strategies in place that I never had to work as hard with my alcohol and drug users. It was like,
Yeah.
just stay away from those places, stay away from those
Yeah.
people,
Yeah.
and they
Yeah.
could do a lot better. But with food and drug foods, there's also some level of experimentation in terms of like everybody's so bio individual that for some people, it's
Mhm.
like, is this a trigger food for you or is it not? Did you just get told that was
Yeah.
something that was,
Yeah.
whether it's fruit, right? Fruit has fructose.
Yeah.
Does this mean that
Yeah.
it's going to light up my brain and I'm addicted?
Yeah.
Or is this just some messaging? And I think the other problem is in this all or nothing diet culture that's so
Yeah.
enmeshed, we have to be so
Yeah.
careful. We really
Yeah.
want the people we work with to have as inclusive a food plan as possible, whole foods,
Right.
so that
Yeah.
they want to do this for the rest of their life.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think it's
That
so
it's
challenging.
sustainable.
Exactly. And I think it's so challenging because if there is a slip or if there is like, it's much more clear cut in alcohol and drugs than it is with foods. And we can't get into that diet mentality where if I have one slip, I'll throw away the whole diet, start a new one, right?
Yeah.
We're doing this for the long game. This
Yeah.
is an
Yeah.
everyday, all day,
Yeah.
and all of these, slips, mishaps, whatever you want to call them,
Mhm.
are just, opportunities for us to learn about what happened there, what can I do next time, and it's growth.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So I think
Yeah.
there's a lot that differs there as well.
Yeah, and it just reminds me, Chris, of when you were interviewing me, where we were talking about, the analogy that with alcohol, for example, you put the plug in the jug, you don't ever have to drink again. But with food, it's like a lion that you have to lock in a cage and then unlock and take out for a walk 3 times a day. You have to eat to survive. So it's a very tricky substance to work with as well. Yeah. So it sounds, I mean, some of my questions were around sugar, but it sounds like it's more than that. Um, we did talk, I'm also thinking because I've interviewed Vera Tarman about the ultra processed food. We talked a bit about that. But sugar is such a huge issue for so many of the people that I work with and talk to. Um, can, yeah, can you talk about sugar addiction?
yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, go ahead, Clarissa.
No, you go this time.
I guess I would be more, my curiosity is like, what specifically about sugar addiction is, you know what I mean? Like that you would want to know, because we
Yeah.
haven't, right? Like we don't have the research that shows that
Yeah.
sugar itself
Yes.
is addictive. And that's part of the issue that we're running into on some
Yeah.
of these committees that we're,
Yeah.
we're working to submit to the World Health Organization to,
Yeah.
have some
Yes.
label in the ICD, some current version of
I'm
the ICD. And
I'm
that's where the
absolutely convinced that sugar is highly addictive and that
Yeah.
science will catch up with us.
Right.
What we
Yes.
already know,
Yeah.
intuitively, emotionally, and physically, right?
Yes.
So many of my clients over the last 26 years, if they stop eating sugar, they can recover.
Yeah.
It's like the one substance.
Yeah.
So the sugar, the carbs,
Yes.
So sugar and processed flour is really what a lot of my food addiction clients, if they give those up, they can recover well. So, but there's just that sugar is in so many things now.
It
Like I don't
is.
think it used to. Like one of my questions is, was there a need for sugar addiction coaching 25 years ago? Like how has the food landscape changed
Yeah.
with sugar?
Right. And it has, and I think people like Belinda Fettke and Vinnie Tortorich and others have done a really good job of like painting this kind of historical picture of like how it all kind of
Yeah.
started and how it's progressed. But ultimately, what we know today is that 80 to 90% of the foods in quotation, in the supermarket are ultra processed in some way. They're in some sort of,
Yeah.
right, bag, box,
Yeah.
something. And they've been dehydrated or ground down or
Yeah.
something. and the fiber has been removed, or it's something that they're
Yeah.
adding fiber to, and
Yeah.
they've removed the fat, so they're adding sugar to. So we know that the exposure that we have today is so much higher than what it was even in the 70s. So even if
Yeah.
people were eating things like macaroni and cheese in the 1970s, the vast majority of it was being homemade, right? So I always think
Yeah.
about like the Mediterranean area and like the Mediterranean diet, and people in Italy making their pasta, or like
Yeah.
growing their own
Yeah.
potatoes or starch,
Yeah.
whatever it might be,
Very
and
good.
not having the same issue that we
Yeah.
in North America tend to have. So we do need it, and it is everywhere. I mean, I don't want to take that and minimize that the problem is everywhere, because it is. I mean, we have clients worldwide. I mean, we talk to
Yeah.
people in New Zealand and Australia and whatever, right?
Yeah.
So we know that the problem is worldwide. But you're right. I mean, 25 years ago, it was on the radar. We have books like Sugar Blues, and
Yeah. William
Banting wrote
Duffy.
in like 1870 something or whatever, right? So
Yeah.
we know it was on the radar, but it wasn't as pervasive as it is today. And so I
Well,
think a
can I
lot of it
just
is,
interject
yeah,
there, Molly?
yeah.
I heard somewhere a long time ago that well, there's that book, William Duffy, Sugar Blues. I mean, I remember my dad had that in the 70s. But I think I read in there that sugar was considered narcotic in the old days. That when people were bringing it, by boat to countries, they had it locked up because it made people go crazy. So
Mhm.
they locked sugar up, and
Well,
yeah,
yeah, if you think about it, sugar was a spice, right? It was considered a
yeah,
spice all of those years ago. And if you had it,
yeah.
it was very expensive, and you had it in very,
Minimal.
small amounts, right? And now, they have figured out, and not only that, right? Like, and then I think about like the US and how slavery was built on
Yeah,
sugar. And I mean, one of the arms of slavery was built around sugar. And and it's made it so easily accessible, like from
yeah,
the beginning, right?
yeah.
And so yeah, ultimately I think today there is a need for it, because the exposure is just so,
Mhm.
it's just so widespread. And it's not even the exposure that you and I are getting, but it's the exposure of me being pregnant with my children and eating it, and them getting it
Yeah,
in utero, right?
yeah.
And then not knowing for the first 3 to 5 years of their life that that's what was going on
They're addicted
for
by the
me,
time
and
they
feeding
come
it
out
to
of the
them.
womb.
Yeah,
Yeah.
potentially, and certainly we have clients who have that story.
Mhm.
Not everybody has that story, but certainly we have. I was a bottle fed baby, and we know from Dr. Robert Lustig, right? Like, that's a baby milkshake. Nobody.
Yeah.
When was the last
Oh,
time somebody took a look
same.
at the ingredients on that thing? Because we have these campaigns that say, a fed baby is the best. Like, fed is
Yeah,
best. Whether it's with
yeah,
formula or breast milk. And I agree. I
yeah,
agree. But then from that public health policy perspective, which is right, like next level where we really need to be, until something starts changing, this is kind of where we're at. That we
yeah,
have these babies who maybe need formula for one reason or another, but like, what we're giving them, are we doing the best we can?
yeah, yeah,
Right? And then, are we doing the best we can with, advertising Fruit Loops to our children on
oh,
Saturday mornings,
yeah,
so that that's what they're begging for. So it starts so young, and
yeah,
it's so big, and it's so normalized. Again, if I think back to my story, not one of my therapists was ever going to say, put down the Fruit Loops, right?
yeah,
Not what, because they're doing it and they're feeding their kids.
yeah.
And so if they tell me that's
Exactly.
the issue, now they have to take a look at their own stuff, because it's
Yeah, yeah,
so normal. And we have to remember,
yeah.
normal doesn't mean correct. It doesn't mean
Or
healthy. It doesn't mean
healthy or
right. It doesn't mean
wise.
right. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, beautiful, beautiful. Well, we're coming to the end here, but this is so fascinating. We do this all day. Yeah, I'm thinking of high fructose corn syrup. That's kind of the killer and everything right now. And so many things. So what I'd like to end with is, people watching this, listening to this, probably, wondering, um, how do I know if I'm a food addict? How do I know if I'm addicted to food? And what can I do? What are some concrete steps I can take right now to, get a handle on the food addiction? What would you say, each of you?
Yeah, well, there's definitely a few websites that we can give you in the link for sure that can help them go through like some of the questions that might help them identify whether these are some problems for them.
Mm,
When it comes to, they could certainly also reach out to Molly and I. We use the MY which is probably the most recognized tool for diagnosing or identifying if somebody's mild, moderate, or severe in their level of food addiction. And then, next steps being whether for the most part, we
mm,
know, right?
mm.
When we're struggling with our relationship with food.
Yeah.
And if it's eating disorder, even because we know, they can be correlated with food addiction. When we look at
Mhm, mhm.
binge eating disorder, we look at bulimia. If they're not finding their answers within the eating disorder community, it may be
Mhm.
worthwhile to take a look at
Yeah.
potentially removing some of these foods that they are struggling to
Mhm,
moderate. When we look
mhm.
at, it's really just the hedonic component of eating food past our homeostatic capacity,
Yeah.
right? So we are eating past our nutrient needs in order to
Yeah.
be able to function, and starting to remove some of these foods at whatever pace feels comfortable. There's definitely 12-step programs. There's the Food Addiction Institute, there's Sweet Sobriety, joining Vera's Sugar Free for Life food
Mhm.
addiction group. I'm Sweet Enough. Both of us are admins in there and we all respond to questions. So it's really just, maybe even meeting for a free consultation with like you, Esther, or I don't know if you
Mhm.
do that. I better not advertise that.
I
but
do,
both,
I
Mo-
do.
but both Molly and I
Thank
do
you.
like half an hour consultations
Yeah, I
to
do
kind
15
of.
minutes.
Perfect. Yeah, to help you examine your relationship with food and maybe ask some of the questions that you haven't been able to ask yourself. And we can help
Mm,
you kind of, sort out some of the nuances within food. And again, it may be you just need to figure out where you need to start on this journey. Is it like, have you done the whole 30 and found some kind of relief? And
mhm,
maybe that's, one of the things that we need to examine,
mhm,
or is it someone that you just really need to take out those ultra processed foods, those specific dark red, red foods? Or
mhm.
are you someone that can really just benefit like from a weighed and measured food plan? That can be really helpful for people too.
Mhm.
There's just so many routes that you can go. And so just don't fall into the one trap of like, there's only one way to recover,
Yeah,
because
yeah, no,
I've worked with
yeah,
hundreds, I think, of clients now. Not one of them is on the same food plan. And so
absolutely.
I need that to be reassuring because,
Yeah.
if there was one food plan for everyone, that's called a diet
Yeah, right. Good point. Excellent. Thank
and
you.
hasn't worked for many, many people. So we'll definitely give you tons of links that you can put in the show
Yeah,
notes
please
so
do. I
that people
will.
can definitely examine their
Yeah.
relationship with food, and not to be scared about it, because it's definitely something that I have rarely met someone who doesn't. When I say I'm a food addiction counselor, they're like, oh, I'm addicted to this, I'm addicted to that, they're addicted to, where before, if I was like, oh, I'm an addiction counselor, nobody ever said, oh, I've got a real problem with alcohol, or like
Yeah,
I
yeah,
really struggle with cocaine. Most
yeah.
people identify with struggling with food
Oh, yeah,
and
absolutely.
overconsumption, right?
Yes, yes, exactly. Molly, will you
Yeah, I
give
think
us
ultimately I would just say everything that Clarissa said buttoned up in, one sentence would be just get support around it. If you're hearing this, watching this, and you're starting to question, or maybe you're watching it because you're already questioning it, reach out and just get support around it. And like Clarissa said, if the person that you reach out to says that there's one way, run away. You really want to look for a clinician or a professional who is willing to meet you where you're at and find the way that works for you. That it's
Mhm.
not right, that it's not just like, well, this is what worked for me, the professional,
Yeah,
so therefore that's how
yeah.
you're going to do it or you're going to fail, right? So
Right,
to,
right.
to just kind of do your research, just like you would with a therapist for a mental health concern. Do your
Exactly.
research, find someone
Find
you
your
click with.
fit.
Yes,
Yeah,
find your
yeah,
fit. Absolutely.
yeah,
And then
yeah.
find your way, listen to your voice. That's the number one thing I want from my clients, is to learn to listen to their internal compass
Oh, good.
and
Yeah,
make decisions from there.
Yeah. Excellent. Wow. Well, this has been so wonderful. I mean, it's mind expanding for me. I can't imagine what it's going to be like for other people listening, watching. I'm so grateful that both of you came on here and gave your um, wonderful resources. Your stories were so touching and powerful, and I'm sure they'll really inspire others. And, all of us have been through this personally, and now we're doing this work professionally. And yeah, you two are obviously very gifted in this area, and I encourage people to check out all of your resources. I'll have them in the show notes. And yeah, I just want to thank you.
Thank you, Esther, for having us.
Thank you, Esther. And it's been
If you enjoyed today's show, please take the time and subscribe to this channel. If you're on YouTube, please give this video a thumbs up and comment on what you liked about it. As well, feel free to pass this episode on to others whom you think may benefit. And of course, we always appreciate positive reviews. We would appreciate it greatly if you took the time to review the podcast on Apple so that others will want to check it out as well, and we can spread the word about these compassionate conversations. Thanks so much.